在正式进入这段对话之前，有必要先交代清楚这期视频的性质。它并不是一段夸中国、贬印度的情绪输出，也不是某种立场先行的宣传片，而是一位长期研究国际政治与战略博弈的印度专家，在相对冷静的语境中，对中美印关系、对中国真实实力所做的一次系统性判断。从中国观察者的角度来看，这类声音之所以值得认真听，不是因为它多么亲中，而恰恰相反，它来自一个原本更容易高估印度、低估中国的国家内部。当这样一位专家开始反复强调必须认清中国实力，印度需要停止幻想，应该向中国学习长期战略耐心，本身就说明现实已经对叙事形成了反向挤压。对话一开始，话题从巴基斯坦切入，主持人抛出的问题其实非常尖锐。巴基斯坦在很大程度上已经被视为中国的跟班，如今美国又重新介入，你不觉得中美之间在巴基斯坦问题上必然会发生冲突吗？中国会忍吗？专家的回答，第一句话就很耐人寻味。他说，中国人非常聪明。这不是一句客套话，而是一个判断前提。他的意思是，中国并不天真，中国从一开始就接受一个现实，美国和巴基斯坦有关系，中巴之间也有关系，这两件事并不必然构成零和冲突。从博弈角度看，这是一种典型的多边容忍策略。中国并没有要求巴基斯坦在中美之间选边站队，也没有把排他性忠诚当成对盟友的唯一要求。相反，中国更在意的是结构性结果，巴基斯坦是否能生存，是否能保持基本稳定，是否在关键安全与经济议题上与中国形成长期互信。在这个前提下，巴基斯坦是否还和美国做生意，是否继续接收美制武器，中国并不会情绪化反应。专家随后给出了一个非常现实的对照，巴基斯坦真正决定性的军事能力和安全底盘来自中国，而不是美国。无论是核计划的早期支持，还是今天的主力装备体系，从歼十、JF-17到导弹、防空系统，核心来源都已经转向中国。这意味着什么？意味着在关键博弈节点上，中国掌握的是不可替代性筹码，而美国更多扮演的是可选项。他说得很直白，如果巴基斯坦还能和美国交朋友，何乐而不为？而中国在这件事上的态度是高度务实的。这里其实点出了一个长期被印度忽视，但中国非常清楚的现实，真正的大国博弈不靠道德绑架盟友，而靠结构绑定。
Pakistan has been it's already seen as almost like a vassal state of China. Now with the Americans getting into the act and trying to build, thing, don't you think there would be some conflict of interest between the two countries? You think China will take it quietly?
See, I think the Chinese are very smart in the sense they understand and accept that there will be a US-Pakistan relationship. They know there will be a China-Pakistan relationship, and they think both can go on without harming each other. That is the way to look at it. Then Pakistan's nuclear program comes from China. It doesn't come from the United States. Yes, the Americans still sell weapons to Pakistan, but increasingly their weaponry is going to be Chinese. Between the J-10 and the JF-17 and the missiles and the air defense systems, this is all coming from there. Now the other part is the BRI coming through Pakistan. The Americans have nothing to match there in terms of investments. So it's still very much a Pakistan-China relationship. But along the way, if you can make friends with the Americans, why not? And the Chinese are very pragmatic in that way. They don't sit there and say, me or you. They're like, yeah, you want to talk to the Americans? Well and good. You want to talk to the Russians? Well and good. So I think they've got some degree of pragmatism in this relationship. And I'll just say one thing quickly. My own sense is the Chinese believe Pakistan should survive, full stop. But they don't mind a Pakistan which talks to the Americans, talks to other people, and so on.
话题转向印度与美国的关系，这一段是整场对话中最刺耳，但也最清醒的部分。专家用了一个极具画面感的比喻，印度就像一个被甩了的前男友。什么意思？分手之后，你开始和别人约会俄罗斯、中国，但你始终盯着前女友的一举一动，希望她回心转意。 他对你稍微示好一句，你就开始无限放大，他下一秒翻脸，你又满脸错愕。他说，印度对美国的态度正是如此。特朗普给莫迪一句生日祝福，新德里举国欢腾。下一句你们不能买俄罗斯石油，立刻又陷入困惑和愤怒。从博弈角度讲，这是典型的心理依附关系，而不是平等伙伴关系。
Come to the part where I think most of our viewers will be very interested. That is the India-US relationship. And I recall, I think last night when we were talking, you said something about, I really like that phrase, that India is behaving like a jilted lover. I mean, that's the, I think,
Yeah.
approximate. Why are you saying that?
Look, let's go back to the analogy. We all know guys who were dumped by their girlfriend. And what do? They start dating other women, in this case, Russia and China. But you've always got one eye out on the old girlfriend in the hope that she's going to ask you back. And anything she does, you try to interpret it way beyond the significance. So Trump wishes Modi happy birthday, and everybody's ecstatic in New Delhi until he goes and says, well, you can't buy Russian oil, and so on. And you're like, how did this happen? And that is what the dumped boyfriend doesn't understand. That, I'm sorry, this is over, this is done, it can't continue the way it does. But you keep looking for these little slivers of hope. And I don't think you should. I think you should be very pragmatic about what you can do with the American.
随后，他开始系统性拆解印美防务合作的真实含义，不是看协议写了什么，而是看没写什么。第一，美国从未承诺，如果印度与他国发生战争，不会对印度实施制裁。而历史恰恰相反，1965年、1971年、1998年，美国都对印度实施过制裁，甚至直接中断关键军工合作，导致项目严重延期。第二，在武器生产和零部件问题上，美国从不承诺排他性，美方并不在乎同一套体系的零部件最终装到谁的装备上。第三，美国绝不允许印度在美制武器平台上部署核武器，这意味着印度的战略自主性从一开始就被锁死在框架之内。第四，也是最关键的一点，核心技术转让根本不存在。他说了一个极具冲击力的对比，中国福建号航母已经实装电磁弹射器，而印度向美国索要同类技术已经5-6年，谈判毫无进展。从中国视角看，这不是技术差距的问题，而是信任等级的问题。在美国的技术分级体系里，印度并不在第一梯队。
And I'll just say one thing. Again, to go with the analogy of the boyfriend, everybody's jumping around with joy on this 10-year defense agreement. Let's break down what's not in the agreement. One, the Americans nowhere have said, in the future, if there is an Indian war with somebody, we will not impose military sanctions or economic sanctions on India. They did that in 65, they did that in 71. After the nuclear tests of 98, they shut down all the cooperation on the Tejas program, which is why Tejas got delayed. And go ask anybody in Washington to give you that guarantee. They'll say, we don't do that. Second thing, again, is in terms of arms production, we're very gung-ho, we're going to get all this here. The Americans will tell, I've asked this of people, of arms trade experts in America, can you guarantee the Indians that a spare part made in India will not be put on a Pakistani F-16 or a Pakistani C-130? And their answer is, we don't do that. No, we've never done that. So, and there are people in this town who tell me, we don't care who it goes to. I said, but the Indian people are patriotic, they do care. And whoever's the prime minister then, when this story were to come out, he would have to resign from office. Third thing is they won't allow you, despite all this bonhomie, to put nuclear weapons on their systems. So if you were to buy a US fighter jet, you can't rewire it to have nuclear weapons. If you were to buy the Tomahawk missile, if they gave it to you, you couldn't make it dual purpose, put that on. And you know, the last part in this is you're not going to get the technologies of transfer you so hope for. And I'll give you one very simple example. tomorrow, the Chinese are launching the aircraft carrier Fujian. Fujian has an electromagnetic catapult on it. Okay? India's been asking the Americans for an electromagnetic catapult for about 5-6 years now. Easily. And that conversation has gone nowhere. Okay. The people will now, I'm sure, watching this say, oh no, great progress has been made. India has yet to be handed anything in terms of technology which the Americans consider precious and valuable. Compare that with Israel, NATO, Australia, which is getting the nuclear submarines. Ask yourself where you are in the list of priorities. So, I mean, these are the 4 things which I think are very important in this relationship. And that is why I just think India needs to think more realistically about it and not hold out hopes that, oh, I left one of my old shirts in her house, so she's going to call me and that means she's interested. No, she wants your smelly shirt out of her house. So that's where the analysis.
接下来，他直接拆穿了另一个流行叙事：美国把印度当作制衡中国的关键棋子。他的判断是，这是一个基于错误前提构建出来的幻想，因为在现实军事节奏下，无论是南海、台海还是东海，印度都到不了现场。等印度部署完成，冲突早就结束了。这句话非常残酷，但非常真实。它意味着印度在美国的核心战略计算中并不占据决定性位置。特朗普在加勒万冲突，在后续一系列印巴问题上的态度始终是中立，甚至连象征性偏袒都谈不上。
You know, the other thing that, I mean, of late that's been coming around is that, well, not late, there was a narrative that said that, you know, the US wanted to use India as a hedge against China. But India, being India, a big country, doesn't like being used by anybody. And so it doesn't actually allow itself to be used. But the narrative today is that, you know, Trump doesn't seem to care whether there's a thing or not. So could you just explain that?
See, I think this narrative was built up in this city on incorrect premises. The thing to remember is the Americans need help if they have to counter China in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, Taiwan. India could never get there. And by the time it got there, it would be all over, given the way these wars are. So it really never fit into American plans. I've talked to the Japanese about this. They say, yeah, Indians, nice people, but they're too far away. So how are we going to do any defense planning? That's one part of it. The other part of it is, when has Trump shown any affection for India, any support for India on the China issue or the Pakistan issue? When Galwan happened, he said, I'm happy to mediate, which means I'm taking a neutral position. When he came back to power in 2025, he says, I'm happy to mediate, again a neutral position. And then Sindoor happens. I don't think I've heard one word from Trump which suggests he's pro-Indian and anti-Pakistani. He's basically, I, through my genius, brought about a ceasefire. So the point is, if you want the Indians to be on your side, you have to show loyalty. Loyalty is a two-way street. Alliances are a two-way street. I'm not sure what India is getting out of that and why India thought it was going to get something out of it.
对话随后点出一个极其关键的对比：印度长期在两头下注，而中国非常清楚自己要什么。这句话其实是整场对话的逻辑分水岭。中国不是没有压力，不是没有外部冲击，但中国的应对逻辑是高度一致的，长期可预测的。而印度的问题在于对外关系高度情绪化，对内战略高度碎片化。在贸易与经济层面，专家也进一步戳破了印度不可或缺的神话。4.1万亿美元经济体听起来很大，但对美国而言，中美贸易额是6000亿美元，美加、美墨都更高。印度担心的 H-1B 签证、初级程序员岗位，在 AI 时代正在迅速失去战略价值。而中国这边已经完成贸易多元化，东盟、欧盟占比持续上升，美国只是第3位。
Again, it's interesting that you of course put it into a very easy to understand kind of a format, but India has for a long time been trying to, for want of a better word, hedge its bets against various things that's been going on. China, on the other hand, is very, very confident about what it wants to do and what it wants to. Do you think a trade deal is likely to happen anytime soon? People here seem to be still very optimistic about it, but they're saying, we won't compromise. Do you think that's likely to happen?
I think a trade deal will happen, but again, let's take this away from Indian hype to Indian reality. Indian hype is Nirupama Rao writing in the Foreign Affairs Journal. India is a 4.1 trillion economy and we are indispensable. That's not reality. Reality is you're concerned about losing H-1B jobs. You're concerned about what is really for the Americans a very small chunk of bilateral trade, given that they do $600 billion of trade with the Chinese and even more with Canada and Mexico. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the reality that I'm getting to here is I don't see why you would think that the Americans would be worried about India, want to do better for India and so on, because they have nothing to gain, honestly. Mm-hmm. You don't sell them anything that they can't buy elsewhere. Gemstones can come from Colombia, Thailand. Textiles can come and do come from Vietnam. And Bangladesh, exactly. And H-1Bs, you don't need entry-level coders anymore. You've got AI. So that portion of it just doesn't appeal to the Americans.
专家认为，印度应该向那些敢于正面应对特朗普的国家学习，因为与特朗普打交道，本质上是一种高波动、低可预测性的博弈环境。不要幻想这种环境会因为关系亲密而改变。而中国不同，印度与中国的关键区别在于对长期可预测性的追求。所以中国的态度非常明确，要谈就谈长期，否则宁可拖。
This is where what you're saying about the trade deal comes in. I think they more or less ironed one out. But Trump has an ego. Trump wants to hear, I brought about a ceasefire. And now he's made Russian oil a sticking point. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a matter of his prestige. Even though he may turn around day after tomorrow and say, I have no problems with Putin selling oil abroad. We're not dealing with somebody with a high level of predictability here. Mm-hmm. And what I would say is what India needs to understand is learn from the people who've resisted Trump. Canada, Mexico, Brazil. But all the countries I mentioned have essentially
You didn't mention China in this list.
Okay, I'll get to China in a second. Mm. But all the countries I've mentioned have said, we're happy to resist Trump. And okay, bring it on. Brazil's already been hit with as big tariffs as India has. What did Brazil do? They went straight to the Chinese and said, how much soybeans do you want? And the American farmers are now crying. Mm-hmm. But I'll come to China. The difference between India and China is this. That is what the Chinese want, long-term predictability. Mm-hmm. What they worry about with Trump is on Monday he says, it's a great deal. On Friday he says, I've changed my mind. The Canadians and the Mexicans are furious about this because they signed a deal with him in his first term. He didn't like NAFTA. He said, the new deal is a great deal. Now the great deal is a bad deal. And the Canadians and the Mexicans are saying, okay, how long would this one last? And I think we can all agree they're justified in having a degree of skepticism. So the Chinese are saying, you want us to deal? Give us a long-term deal.
随后，他直接反驳了西方主流媒体长期渲染的中国经济陷入困境叙事。通过官方数据表明，中国已经完成了对单一市场的去风险化。这就是为什么中国在面对关税威胁时，并不会像很多国家那样情绪失控。而中国真正的底气来源，制造能力、基础设施、电力系统。从6代机、电动车、无人机到高铁、高速公路、电网，再到支撑 AI 的大规模电力，中国构建的是一个系统级能力，而不是单点突破。这也是为什么他说中国现在说话是有底气的，不是嘴硬，是结构硬。
Badly underestimated us. And see, the Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal have all pitched into Trump's positioning on China. That China is in trouble, the economy is in bad shape. On September, their exports went up 8.3%. How bad shape can it be? Right? They've diversified their trade where they have $980 billion of trade with ASEAN, and then they have another close to $800 billion with the EU. Mm-hmm. The US is number 3. So they don't know what to do. And the third reason he's so confident is China manufactures. And Indians need to learn this before dismissing China. They now have 6th-generation fighters. India's still struggling with the Tejas, 4th generation. They make the most electric vehicles in the world. Their electric vehicles, the BYDs, are the best. And since both of us are car nuts, Xiaomi, which is a phone company, entered the electric vehicle business in 2021. It's made a car which was tested in Germany this year on that super fast racetrack. It logged the 3rd fastest time of all time. You know, the 3rd fastest speed of all time.
You're talking about the telecom company?
Yeah, I'm talking about Xiaomi, the phone. This is like Airtel making they want to move into this area now. DJI is the largest drone manufacturer. And I can go down the list, but the other thing the Chinese have done, which has positioned them really well in the global economies, more highways than the United States, more high-speed rail than the whole world put together, and huge electricity generating capability. Why is the last one important? It allows you to run a lot of AI. And I mean, just to give you an idea, where I live in the United States, I'm being now charged a $5 surcharge on my electricity bill so that we can build another power plant to attract AI. So it's a 5-7 year process. Look at where the Chinese are today. So there is a confidence in what the Chinese say is our original goal was to catch up with the Americans. Now it is to exceed and see how far we go. Mm-hmm. And they're not scared of Trump hitting them with tariffs. They're not scared of chip denial, because look at how well they're doing. And cell phones, the Huawei Mate 70 is as good as an Apple now.
而印度缺乏制造能力。所谓 iPhone 制造，本质只是组装，核心零部件仍然来自中国。最后，他点出了一个很多印度舆论不愿正视的事实：中国已经领先1到2代。无论是军工、制造、机器人，还是完整产业链，这都已经不是10年前的中国了。而中国制造2025已经从规划变成了现实结果。
The problem for India is India doesn't manufacture. And don't tell me the iPhone, because you make the case of the iPhone, everything else comes from China. But in all these areas I've talked about, the Chinese are a generation to 2 generations ahead now. Mm-hmm. And they're also doing big work in robotics, not just sort of industrial robots, but they're making what, for the lack of a better term, is humanoid robots, which can walk and talk and function like human beings. Mm-hmm. So if you are there, you know that the Americans can't threaten you. And yeah, they can stop chips. But the point the Taiwanese said is, if you tell us not to sell chips to China, that's 50% of our market. So they have positioned themselves, and I haven't even talked about their weapons systems yet.
Right.
Okay, the PL-15, which was used against India, is a 10-year-old missile, or more than that actually. They now have the PL-17 and the PL-21. They are moving ahead by leaps and bounds. Robot tanks, underwater robot drones. This is not the China of even 10 years ago. All the money they invested in Made in China 2025, it's come home to roost. And it's a much more confident nation. It's a country which is now ready to tell the Americans, no, we won't be bullied. And we have cards.
在承认现实之后，他给印度提出了一个理性，但在舆论场上极易被误解的建议：即便存在边界争端、地缘竞争，也不妨碍与中国做生意。最终，他把所有观点收束为一句话：印度应该效仿中国当年的韬光养晦。他用一组宏观数据收尾：中日韩 GDP 总量已经比欧盟27国高出30%。未来在亚洲，印度必须尽快想清楚自己想在经济上站在哪个位置，军事上如何规划路线， 政治上又该站在哪里？
We already have an issue with the border and other, and we also compete for the same resources. Do you see India and China, if not kissing and making up, but perhaps agreeing to disagree on certain things and moving on, like you had suggested the last time, and you caused quite a storm with that one?
Well, this is to the audience. I was right, because I said you can be enemies with China, but you can still trade. And I gave the example of Japan, which has serious territorial disputes with China. I said you don't have to forget your territorial disputes or your interests, but you can make money off your enemy. The Chinese-Japanese bilateral trade is $300 billion. That's not to be sneezed at. And here's the thing I think your audience needs to know. Go and look at last year's economic survey of India, which could only be passed at the behest of the Indian Prime Minister. It says very clearly we welcome Chinese foreign direct investment. It also says we will do a China plus one strategy, which is, yeah, you're manufacturing in China, but to hedge your bets, manufacture in India. That one is not going too well.
No.
You can get a lot of Chinese investment. So my take is this: do not give up your territorial claims and essentially sit in the meantime and increase trade with China. But I think India should do what done Chinese, which is bide your time, hide your capabilities, build your capabilities, and don't volunteer, which is more or less I'm putting a lot of different dung thoughts together. And he said, when the time is ripe, then you can be a global actor. And I think that's where India should be too. That bide your time, improve your capabilities. And I'll end by saying this. China, Japan, and South Korea now have 30% more in terms of GDP than the 27 EU countries put together.
Okay.
Yeah. So all this rubbish about how Europe is going to transform things, no. The future is Asia. And the question for India is, it has to decide where it wants to be economically. It has to decide how it wants to chart its course militarily. And it has to decide where does it stand politically.
This is a conversation we could have continued for a long, long time, but we've run out of time.
Sure.
I do hope the people who attacked you for saying we should do business with China the last time are listening to this particular recording.
They'll be upset with somebody else.
从中国观察者的角度看，这段对话的真正价值不在于印度人夸中国，而在于它清楚地揭示了一点：当博弈进入中长期阶段，情绪、幻想和站队都会被结构性能力逐步清算，而这正是中国这些年一直在做，而很多国家直到现在才开始意识到的事情。